Chapter 8. The Wind Beneath the Earth. Kermorvan's breath shuddered in his throat. "Are you sure?" he demanded. "So many rumors." "These are no rumors," said Ansgar firmly. "Your coming here stirred the whole Duergar nation to alarm, the more so as you came through our northern outpost, that closest to the ice. Strange stirrings have been noted there of late, and the fell things roaming the mountains have greatly increased, so now no northern pass is safe. We have been keeping a special watch lest some assault on our realm also is brewing, and even wrung permission out of Andvar for some scouts to venture afield. They now report that this winter and last, some of the Ekwesh have not sailed homeward, but have remained on the northern lands they have wasted, levying tribute from your inland towns under threat of assault. We hear that they even build longhouses and bring in thralls to farm the lands for them. Evil times. Those ravening creatures are worse even than the Eastmen who first overran our lands." Kermorvan twitched with anger, and the Duergar smith made a conciliatory gesture. "They were your kin, I know, and not all behaved evilly to us, but most did, driving us from lands we had mined and farmed freely for many lifetimes, calling us vermin, and slaying us out of hand, with a price on our skins." "Surely not," cried Kermorvan. "It was so, I assure you," said Ansgar calmly, "though I am not old enough to remember those times. Even Andvar is not quite, but his father was. I cannot wholly blame him for his distrust of men." Kermorvan glared down into his ale. "But that is of no matter now. Our concern is to get you away from here and back to your folk as soon as may be. And that means before Lord Andvar can prevent you." Kermorvan looked thoughtful. "That will not be easy. This is a mighty warren you have here, and well guarded." "But we will help you," put in Ills. "We, and others of like mind. We have been laying our plans." "You should not take such a risk," said Elof, Kermorvan nodding his agreement. "If Andvar should find out—" "What can he do?" smiled Ansgar. "Very little to us, for all his bluster. There are too many of us, and we are not without influence. It is you who are in danger, and you should go at once, before word can reach him. Once out of the capital, Andvar will have difficulty in bringing you back. So, we have arranged that there will be a boat waiting for you at the quay, small and fast as suits your need. It should be there an hour from now, well supplied for a long voyage. You may sail southward and leave from one of our southern gates, now little in use." "This is generous, Master Ansgar," cried Kermorvan. "And I have some skill in boats myself." "But not below ground," said Ills. "You dent that high brain pan of yours on a passing stalactite. And you don't know our waterways. Me, I've played courier to the south often enough, and ridden the odd rapid or two for sport. So I shall be going along." "But—" began Kermorvan. "And for that, and other reasons," said Ansgar inexorably. "We who favor aiding you, men, we must have better reports of what passes in your lands. In Suddenly, most of all. We hear some tidings from the children of Tapiao, and one or two outlivers, but they are odd even for men. A clearer eye is needed, one that is happier in the hard light of the sun than most of us. As I was once, but I have dwelt below ground now for many a long year. And it must be someone who will find acceptance among men they meet also." Elof laughed. "Hills will find that readily enough. Eh, Cormorvan?" Ills fixed the swordsman with an eye of black steel and fingered the haft of a heavy axe at her belt. "Why, yes, I suppose so," he managed, "in her way." "Truly," said Ansgar, "there are times when even I despair of understanding your folk. But it is settled then." He sniffed severely. "Now, perhaps I may have some peace here. It has been noisy enough with one young person, growing restless and wanting to see the world. But with two... Ah, well, perhaps it will seem too quiet then." The wide eyes of the great Durg scanned them over the edge of the ale mug. "Do you take care, Ills, and you also, you men, for we have learned to value you both. Elof, because he is so like us, more than I had ever thought a human could be. Perhaps you have a strain of us in your ancestry." Elof laughed. "I'm flattered. I might think more highly of my parents, if that were true." "Is it possible?" demanded Kermorvan. "You are of different races." Ansgar shook his head. "Simply two aspects of one, as alike as facets of the same jewel." "As alike," grinned Ills, "as dog and wolf, if you will forgive the comparison." They laughed. "But do not think it is only kinship that counts, warrior," Ansgar added. "Though you have not been so happy among us, you have stinted nothing. That we will not forget." Kermorvan rose and bowed. "Lord Ansgar, I thank you. It seems you have been kinder to us than we deserve, and I shall strive to be worthy of it. If anything yet lives of the southern realm when all is done, better days may come between it and the mountain folk." "Let us hope so," nodded Ansgar. "But for now, you must depart. The boat should be there any minute, and you must take it at once. The southward winds are strongest soon, within the first hours of the evening, so prepare yourselves. There's a scabbard there to fit your new sword, Kermorvan. You have your other gear? Good. And you, Elof, yours?" "All but this huge hammer," said Elof, rolling it in oilcloth in his bag of tools. "These are not the least prize I carry away, Kermorvan. Finer they are by far than the ones I left to molder in the marshlands, free of any taint and full of Ansgar's wisdom. No smith among men has better." "Or deserves them more, I think," said Kermorvan. "Well, master, is there some secret way we must take?" Ansgar looked surprised. "Hardly. You may simply walk down to the wharf. None would hinder you if you are with me. We shall say our farewells there." Nevertheless, Ansgar paused as they crossed the great gallery, poised like a watchtower over the northern entrance of the river, and took care to scan the streets spread out on the slopes below. There are few folk about, and no guards on the long wharf. It looks safe enough. Let us hasten. Elof shivered as they made their way down the cobbled streets. The air of the great cavern felt dank and cool after the fierce glare of the forge, the light dim. It might have been that they made him nervous, but he noticed that Ansgar, for all his casual words, stopped and looked around carefully at every corner, and most of all at the southern gallery, now almost overhead. We must be wary here, for that watchtower is a favorite perch of Andvar's. Now he grows aged, like an old eagle in his eyrie. An ancient bat in his belfry, commented Ilse. Well, there's our craft, just making ready by the long wharf there. Trim little thing, isn't she? A mast rose by the wharf side, taller than most of the trading craft, and differently rigged. The hull below it was long and lean, some 30 feet from stem to stern, and slender of beam, with a blunt, vertical bow ending in a high carved post, and a long tiller stretching forward over the stern. It was fully decked, with a companionway aft and a covered hatchway to the hold just behind the mast. This bore 2 spars instead of 1, a short one near the masthead, and a wider one not far below, from which Duergar crewmen were already unfurling a mainsail that flared out widely at its base. A topsail also, said Kermorven, surprised. I hope the rigging is stronger than your wont, even in these light airs. Ilse sniffed. Strong enough, warrior. It's a stepped mast, so you can lower it at need, and that takes firm stays anyway. Just you sit tight and let me do the sailing. I've handled these courier boats before. I doubt it not, muttered Kermorven gloomily to Elof. How would a mere boat dare misbehave? Ansgar chuckled. Well, my lads, all your needs are aboard, and so must you be. I'll not make a long farewell of it, but... A sudden shout sounded from above, a hoarse command in the Duergar tongue, and then in the northern. You below there, stand! As one, they looked up at the low battlements of the gallery, and Ansgar cursed. There stood Andvar, and not on his own. A cluster of grim-faced guards gathered around him. His rage was almost visible, and it quivered in his rasping voice. Has it come to this, then, that one of my trusted counselors will stoop to conspiracy with foes and usurpers? Did you imagine I would not hear of such a thing? That all were as disloyal to our folk as you? We had only to catch you in the act. Ansgar growled his disgust, and glanced down at the wharf. There is always some fool. Listen, lads, Ilse, do you make a run for the boat while they're still out of bowshot. Elof shook his head. And leave you here to face... To face nothing. He'd shoot you gladly, but he'll never dare touch me. He's right, hissed Ilse. Come! But before they had clattered 10 paces down the steep slope, Andvar jerked his stick in the air, and with a low rumble, something slid forward over the outmost end of the battlements. A fearsome thrusting beak of a device, that was unmistakably a weapon. Anvar tugged angrily at his beard. "Stay where you are," he cried, his voice cracking and shrill, "till the guards come, or we will shatter you and your boat together." "He's taken leave of his wits," hissed Ills, as they came to a skidding halt. "Look at the guards. They don't like this." "But they may still fire upon us," said Elof, "if they believe your people's survival rests on it. And you can be sure Anvar has chosen his most loyal followers." "Are you gone mad, Lord?" shouted Ansgar furiously. "My daughter is with them." "The worse for her. Upon her own head is any harm, if she will dally with men. And I will have a reckoning for this upon you both, for all the council may say. You betray your land and people to a—" His words were cut short by a sudden sound, high and distant, cleaving the still air like a blade. In the northward tunnel, the steely rant of a trumpet was ringing echoes off the rock. The echoes took form and became other trumpets, louder, nearer, blasting out an alarm along the dark river. Ills cried out and pointed, and they saw flashes and flickers of light awaken in the tunnel blackness. High on the towers of the citadel, a wide concave mirror swung round to catch and relay the light, and from the town behind came a rising outcry, doors slamming and feet running. A deep bell tolled in the citadel, and from across the town, high in the cavern walls, another pealed in discordant answer. "The watch is calling," puffed Ansgar, trotting down to join them. "The last they signaled this, thus. It heralded your coming. But what can this be now? Ills, read me the message." The lights danced in her large eyes. Her lips moved, spelling out the letters in the flickering light. "It comes from the far north, moving on the mountain wall. Some assault preparing." They looked at each other as the flickering slowed and stopped. For 3 breaths they waited. Then it began again. "Attack!" said Ills between clenched teeth. "They come!" Then she cried out. They all saw it as it happened. The furthest, dimmest light in the tunnel flared suddenly and grew bright, blazed out red like an ember in the sudden blast. The firelight leapt from it an instant to all the other lights, capered red in the high mirror above, then went out. A sound came rolling out of the darkness, flanked and distorted by its own echoes, a booming, bestial rumble. Behind rode a wind that whistled and pulsed, as if the blackness itself gasped for breath, and on it a stink of sour musk, of hot metal, of burning meat. The boat's half-lowered sail threshed and beat like the wings of a terrified bird, and fell with the boom of canvas as the startled crew let go the sheets. Again the sound drummed and rolled. The lights flickered again. The trumpet notes blared to a scream against a distant clamor of voices, and a streak of red leaped in the dark. The wind throbbed hot on the watchers' faces, and out of the tunnel glided 2 huge shadows. Voices rose in panic from the town. The boat crew sprang ashore and bolted. For a moment, Elof and Kermorfin could make out only the beat of huge wings in the gloom. and between them, dancing points of dark iridescence, of something long and writhing. High they soared, flitting through the shadows of the roof, and then one shape swooped and fell away on thrashing wings, straight down towards the rooftops of the town. From the gallery above came Anvar's voice in hoarse command, and the war machine began to swing round and up. But it was slow, too slow, for the shape arrowed down now upon the gallery itself. From all sides came a single, terrified shout, and the rumble of running feet. But Anvar had just time enough to draw himself upright and erect, lift the staff he no longer leaned on high over his head, and brandish it fiercely at the swooping shadow. Then a spurt of fire spat downward and streaked along the battlements. The Lord of the Duergar stood still, a dark silhouette defiant against the racing flame. But it rolled over him, and he was gone. Small black figures scuttled this way and that, sprang in desperation even over the battlements, only to blaze in midair and streak down like starstones onto the huddled roofs beneath. In the redoubled glare, the beating wings showed transparent. The long serpentine body hanging below glittered and sparkled, its short legs raking at the air like a hunting cat clawing its prey. But among the lines of flame, shapes struggled with the war machine. There was a loud metallic bang and snap, and the beast lurched away from its play and tumbled in the air, leaving smoking streaks of cracked stone across the gallery. That rumbling roar shook the air, and Elof and the others instinctively ducked as the shape fell towards them, wings booming and clapping. It was immense. It seemed to fill the cavern roof. Then it flattened out into a glide. The wharfside lights glittered a second on scales like small shields, then shattered before the wind of its passage. Liquid fire beat and boiled through the streets ahead. The rumble of running feet was lost in howls and screams. War machines spat from the citadel walls, and a shower of harpoons came rattling down. One dropped smoking from the air and stuck, quivering, in the deck of the boat. Down from the roof dived the second shadow, greater than the first, to strike at the citadel, and strange shadows capered before its spattering flame. "Dragons!" gasped Ansker, struggling to his feet. "We must get to the citadel if we yet can. A grown pair of that size has not been seen in the world in my memory, nor so bold an attack. They have passed all our northern towns to strike straight at the heart of our land. Come!" "We cannot," said Kermorven, and drew his sword. In the streets ahead, a wingtip flickered briefly over a roof. There came the sound of a wall crumbling, and hoarse screaming suddenly drowned in the belching rumble. A light spurt of fire shot up, racing along a street like a fast-flowing river, kindling flames on either hand. The smaller shadow coursed overhead, twisted gracefully up the cavern wall, across the roof, and sped back down across the housetops once more. "The worm plays with our people," said Ilse thinly. "The filthy brute has got between half the town and the citadel, while its fellow engages the defenses. Now he may clean it out as he pleases. Father, what can we do?" "We hope it tires of its play," leaves a way clear, even for a few moments. That would let most folks still in the town find safety, if the citadel gates may be opened. Those beasts must not get in. They would hunt us out of it, settle there, and breed where we could not easily come against them. The noise above was deafening, the deep rumbling dragon cries shaking stones from the high roof to crash down upon the town. Under the clangor of the bells, the cries and hammering of weapons, it was an effort to think, easy to panic. At the far end of the wharf, a heavy trading barge suddenly spread sail and swept out into the middle of the river, passing them as it made for the southward gate. Down like a stone from the roof dropped the greater shadow, long tail snaking, down between boat and the gate. The craft looked tiny against it. A catapult twanged above, and again the watchers ducked as a heavy bolt bearing a thick, blue-flamed charge plunged down past them, narrowly missing their boat at the wharf. It splashed hissing into the river, and a blue glow still burned as it sank. The tail of the creature swung up, and then lashed down upon the hapless barge, cracking like a whip on the water. It struck the flanks of the barge with a dull boom. Figures fell on the deck. The mast whipped, cracked, and toppled into the water. The barge, holed, rolled over and drifted to one side, cries coming to the wharf as its crew struggled around it in the river. Overhead, wings beat. The long head ducked down, and the thin jaws parted. A single gout of flame dropped onto the water and spattered into a ring of floating fire. The hulk blazed, and the cries fell silent. The beast swept upward again, against a shower of darts. "So, no escape by boat," muttered Kermorven. "Where has the smaller brute gone now? It no longer quarters the town." "The main street there is clear," panted Ilse, and drew the axe from her belt. "We might make a run." "I see no better way," said Ansgar. "Come then, Elof." "Elof?" "Go on," gasped Elof, struggling with his pack. "I'll follow straight." The others hesitated, but he waved them away, and they ran. He stumbled after them, still wrestling with the straps. The shadows of the cobbles danced underfoot in the changing patterns of fire and thrashing wings overhead. One street went by, and then another, empty, and the slope steepened. Ahead of them lay the corner they must turn to reach the gate, but many minutes of running still lay between when the lesser dragon stepped, slithering round it, and faced them. Kermorven, as he stumbled to a halt, was first to see the look in those eyes as it turned to them, and knew that it had been waiting deliberately for any seeking to escape that way. They were appalling eyes, as huge in proportion as a bird's, and brighter, wickeder. They blinked once, slowly, as a snake does, a thick, clear scale sliding like a shutter, and when it dropped, they were aglow with delighted malice. The wings rose and rustled like ancient leather, spanning the street's width, then folded again in a waft of musky stench. Oily greenish scales rattled between legs and body as it paced forward, lightly, almost mincing, wholly unlike the ungainly beast in the forest. The hooked claws scored the cobbles. Elof, coming up behind, saw Kermorven stand his ground as the thing advanced, hefting the new sword almost regretfully, like one contemplating some foolish extravagance. The head tossed, the nostrils flared and steamed. Then Elof plunged past Ansker and Ills, and elbowed his friend fiercely aside. The same movement of the arm drew on the gauntlet, and as the meshed teeth parted, he thrust it out in, as he realized, the self-same gesture as Andvar's. The street vanished into roar and flame. It roiled and swirled in front of him, filling his sight with dazzling intensity. Yet he felt nothing. Wonderingly, almost absently, he remembered to close his fingers. The fire swirled and died, and beyond it, half blinded, he met the maddened stare of the dragon. Between them, the cobbles were slick with something yellowish and oily. A foully acrid stench caught at his throat. He reeled, fist bunched tight against something that shook and quivered. Saw the huge eyes glitter, the beast's head toss again and come thrusting forward, and as the serrated teeth gaped, Elof flung his hand out wide, as if to leap down its very throat. The world puffed outward in light and noise. A great hand seemed to brush him aside. Then sight returned, and he was sprawling on the cobbles, with awful sounds in his ears. Past him dashed a tall figure, and as he picked himself up, he saw Kermorven plunge into the threshing, coiling mass, raise his sword high, and hew down at the struggling thing. There was a deafening yell, and fire spurted upward. He picked himself up, drew his own sword, and hobbled forward. The huge head twisted in front of him, scorched, sooty black, its jaws hanging, an eye in sunken ruin. Kermorven hacked again at the upturned throat, and flame ran across the seam. The body convulsed. He was hurled aside, and the living eye glared up at Elof. Clasping the black sword in both hands, armored left and bare right, he smote at the outstretched neck where Kermorven had struck. The blade rang on cobbles beneath. Agony spattered like hot metal across his hand, and the head sagged. 2 axe blades thudded into the gap. Then Kermorven soared, and the head dropped. They staggered back from the convulsing corpse. Flames spurted among the blood and filth that pooled in the street, and flickered suddenly on their fouled blades. Elof's forge work had hardened him to ignore most burns, but abruptly he winced and brought his scorched hand to his mouth. A weirdly bitter taste polluted his tongue, and he spat hastily. "It burns from within!" shouted Kermorven in disgust, scraping his blade clean against a stone. "What manner of beast can live thus?" "None," gasped Ansker breathlessly, holding his side. "Elof caught its first fire and lit the foul stuff it spews while yet in its mouth." "Guard yourselves!" shouted Ills. Overhead, they saw the other beast swing away from the defenses and hover high under the roof, wings thrashing, as it saw what had become of its fellow. For a moment, they thought it would swoop upon them, but then a long, blackened tube thrust out over the citadel's high walls. There was a sudden, spitting roar, louder even than the dragon's. A ball of blue fire lanced across the height at the beast's wing, so it had to fall awkwardly aside. Up into its path curved a shower of darts, and a great cheer went up from all around. A longship had come gliding out of the northward tunnel, with many more war engines upon its decks, and behind it spread the sails of another. The dragon plunged aside towards the far side of the cave. "From the north," said Ansgar, recovering his breath in deep relief. "They have held off any further assault, then, and come to our aid. Ills, my love, and you lads, now's your chance. Into your boat and away." Kermorven and Elof looked uncertainly at each other. "Don't be such damned fools of men," roared Ansgar. "Think we can't cope now with one little dragon?" Excuse me. "But suppose you lads get hurt, or your precious weapons spoiled. Who will save your city then?" "But you," said Elof, clenching his fingers. "I can reach the citadel now, can't I? Well, will you stand blithering while Kerberheim burns?" Kermorven's sword clanged back into his scabbard. "Fare you well, then, and our thanks." Ills blew her father a kiss. "Take care," he called. "Send word when you can, and may the good will of the mountain folk go with you." Elof raised his hand, unclenching the fingers, and captured light sparkled a moment from the jewel he waved. Ansgar's way was lit clear. The Duerg turned and went stumping up the slope toward the citadel. Ills was already running, but as they reached the wharf, he saw her stop once, look back, and run on, and knew that the high carved gate had opened. The deck of the little boat boomed and swayed as they sprang down onto it. Kermorven swore. A plume of smoke rose from where the dart had fallen, heated by dragon fire. Elof ran to it at once and began hacking at the planking, leaving Kermorven and Ills, who knew what they were doing, to seize the flapping sheets and halyards and secure the sail. Suddenly he laughed and closed his armored left fist around the dart. The fire died at once, and he was able to wrench it out and toss it overboard. A light spurt of flame danced on his palm and was gone. "Well done, my smith," laughed Kermorven as he ran to cast off. "It has other uses, your little toy, than giving fire drakes a taste of their own." They laughed, slightly giddy with the sudden release. Kermorven clapped him on the back. "It was bravely done, that. You may call yourself a mighty warrior now, and no mistake." "I do not wish to," said Elof, as Kermorven thrust a pole into his hands. Ills leaned hard on the tiller, and together they pushed the bows out into the stream. He looked around at the mess of smoke and flame on shore, the carnage and the noise of battle. "A smith is all I wish to be, and at peace." "Time enough for when you're old," called Ills from the stern, angling the tiller delicately as the tunnel mouth gaped wider ahead. "Kermorven, take you the halyard, and hoist the topsail, if you want to live that long." Kermorven cursed under his breath, but sprang to obey. With the topsail up, the little craft gathered speed rapidly, cleaving the dark water cleanly under its keel. They slipped slowly under the high arches, and darkness folded over them. The tunnel mouth became a patch of flickering light, dwindling behind them, and the sounds of conflict dispersed into echoing rumbles in the unseen roof. "The lanterns," began Ilse, and then said, more softly, "No. Better we go as far as we can without them. I can see enough, for now. This part of our way is well traveled and deep. We have only to keep with the current." "Will boats not be coming from the southern towns also?" "Yes, but not for some time yet. The cave winds are against them for now, and going against the wind is a long haul on a narrow river. They will row until the wind changes, and not reach this stretch till morning. By that time I think the dragon will be slain, or have fled if it can. We have dealt with such attacks before, though none so powerful." They sat silent for long, their exhausted bodies ringing with the fury of the last hour, while the boat glided on peacefully, and the row of battle died away. A feeling of peace settled around Elof in that cool darkness, and yet he found himself resenting it. "I don't know why," he muttered, groping his way across the deck. "My hand was burned by that brute's blood. It pains me, but there is something else." "Does that gauntlet gall you?" suggested Kermorven. "Take it off, man, and relax." "Not I. And your hand yet lay on your sword the last I saw it," said Elof sharply. "Caress," barked the swordsman. "I cannot rest either after all that. My heart halts in this murk, and it tells me all's not yet past. The lanterns, girl." "As you wish," said Ilse. "I can lower their covers from here." The familiar smoky red glow flickered slowly to life at either side of bows and stern, and at the masthead. "It feels as if the breeze is freshening anyway. As well to see our way clear. Hasn't it fallen silent back there?" And as she spoke, a cool gusty wind did indeed bellow out the sail, and the small ship bobbed and bounded ahead. All of a sudden, Elof sprang up. "Silent indeed," he hissed, seized a lantern from the rail, and bounded high onto the stern, clutching the carved post. He hung there a few breaths, peering. Was he imagining things? The wind's chill fingers ruffled his sweat-soaked hair. "The wind!" He shouted and swept out his sword. "Kermorven, to me! The brute is on our heels!" Ilse sprang up with a cry. Kermorven came stumbling along the deck and up to where Elof stood. "What? I see nothing." "The wind! And the fighting has stilled back there. Feel how it gusts and freshens?" "But why?" began Ilse. "It's wings!" shouted Elof. And then there was no more arguing. A low coughing rumble echoed out of the darkness. A great blast of the dragon stench swept about them, and it was as if the shadows beyond the stern folded down and fell. A firebolt struck the water only just astern, burst, and scattered across the dark surface in a hiss of steam. Pale eyeless fish leaped in alarm and fell back dying. Gobbets of flame floated flaring upon the water, and the tunnel was filled with firelight. A pulsing, snaking shadow. The second dragon came gliding across the roof. Downward it swung towards the little boat. But as it came, the sails boomed tight, the rigging thrummed, and the boat gave a great leap forward, its lean bows lifting on a sudden foam crest. The dragon, aiming for where it had been, plunged down astern, flailing its wings desperately to avoid the cold blackness beneath. The boat shuddered and ran before the blast, and Ills had to slacken the straining mainsail lest it burst. She shouted with laughter, "He's driving us along!" It was true. Unfolded, the wings of the beast were vast, many times greater than the sails, and the wind of them that had heralded its coming was enclosed in this narrow passage. The more it strained to catch up, the faster it drove them, though the blast was gusty and hard to handle. But at last it seemed to see what it was doing. As they came out into a wider, higher stretch of the river, it rose suddenly, wheeled away, and with wings outspread, sank slowly downward towards the deck. Barely in time did Elof raise his hand, for the blast of fire was better aimed this time, and again the mist of flame billowed around him. Then it was gone, and an iridescent pool settled on the river, flickering into flame as it touched the rest. Elof closed his fingers as if around some invisible sword hilt, and a blade of fire roared from the hollow of his palm, too quickly for the beast to escape in this narrow space. There was a shriek of pain. A gap appeared in the edge of one membranous wing, and the beast tumbled awkwardly aside. Kermorvan's voice echoed defiantly under the roof. "Save your spark, worm! We've the match of it here!" And it was as if the creature understood him, for without another blast of fire, it rolled over in the air and fell hawk-like upon them. Down across the stern it swooped, long jaw hanging as if to rake the blind fish from the water on its crest of teeth. Ills slammed the tiller towards the wind. The two men swung round, and blades gray gold and black swept up to meet the dragon. Elof, clinging to the backstay, reeled in stench and windrush, heard Kermorvan shout, "Morven, Morlenhall!" and himself struck out blindly at the vast, arrowing mass as it flashed past, eyes glinting, jaws snapping. Elof heard a crash, felt the backstay leap and thrum against its arm, and then it was gone, past, rising away. Kermorvan was sprawled on the deck, but already picking himself up. Dark drops slid steaming from his blade, and Elof saw the like on the point of his own. He looked up at the dragon, saw it circling, pawing frantically at great, welling slashes along its muzzle. "One more swipe like that, and he'll fetch down the mast," yelled Ills. "He'll be back any minute. Hold on, there are old side channels along here." She leaned on the tiller and kicked the sheet winch rattling free. The sails flapped, the boat lurched and heeled slowly to port, and swept in between two rising spears of rock that stood like sentinels from the water. The gunwale scraped and splintered along the rock, and the hull bounced as something underneath chewed at it. The high mast rattled and bent among hanging teeth of rock. Some snapped and fell spear-like towards the deck, and then they were through. Sails flapping slack, the boat glided over a surface that shone green and scummy under the lamps, a stagnant pool, and stopped with a gentle jolt and low booming sound against something in their path. "Ills, it's blocked!" shouted Elof, running for the bows, where something bulky protruded from the water. "Idiot!" shouted the Duergar girl, bouncing from her seat. "Haven't you ever seen a lock before? Kermorven, grab a pole and slide the gate and shut the gates behind us." Looking astern, Elof saw the high posts protruding from the water, the system of chains and pulleys leading to what must be massive counterweights overhead. Kermorven, who had evidently seen these things used before, reached out with a boat pole and tripped a mechanism. The weights fell clicking downward, and the scummy water swirled as submerged gates swung shut. From beyond the bows came a sudden trickle of water, growing to a spilling fall. But across the water astern flame licked, and a great streak of it came splashing between the high rocks. One splintered at its narrow top as a spear-tipped tail swung against it, and the dragon was climbing away again. "He'll be through next time," called Kermorven, looking at the reflection that writhed and scudded over the disturbed river. "Can't wait for the basin to empty," Ilse yelled. "Elof, your sword! Cut the counterweights free!" Elof looked up. In the light of the bow lanterns, he saw another set of chains and weights above the forward gates. Sword in hand, he hoisted himself up on the forestay, swung out as far as he could, and chopped at the hanging loops of chain. Even the blade he had made for Kermorven might not have served, for this was Duergar steel of vast and ancient age, and there was set on it a great virtue of neither corroding nor growing brittle. Time had but tempered it. But older yet was the black blade, and it sheared screaming through one chain to starboard, and then to port. Slowly, majestically, like the redwood trunks they were shaped to represent, the counterweights toppled forward. One fell into the dark beyond the gates with only a sullen splash, but the other dropped upon the gate beneath and knocked it sagging on its hinges. Elof had the barest instant to drop back into the boat. Water gushed and swirled through the gap. The gates were thrust aside in its rush, and the little boat was flung forward into the dark upon a toppling cascade of foam, and a last great blast of air. High above, fire spurted into the blackness, and splashed along the cavern roof, dripping a blazing drizzle into the ruined lock. The travelers, clinging to what they could in their healing craft, had a last glimpse of a long, wicked head thrust baffled into the narrow space, where its wings could not be spread to their full, and heard a final shriek of rage ring jagged along the walls. It was an animal sound, and yet Elof could almost believe he heard words in it, though he could only guess at their meaning. He saw Ilse wrestling with the tiller, Kermorven hauling on the main sheet and unable to help, and as the bows lurched upward, he took his chance and went sliding down the deck to her. They seized upon the jerking, lurching bar, forced it down between the teeth of its retaining rack, and leaned on it, clinging together and grinning foolishly at each other. It felt good, very good, in the first relief of escape. Ilse's wide eyes were brighter than ever under her wet, tousled hair, her bare arms warm against his, and there was a heedless exhilaration in this mad rush down into the dark, a joy in being alive among noise and spray and turmoil and cool air rushing by. Kermorven was less happy. The sail had backed violently, forced against the mast by the sudden rush, and only his quickness in freeing the sheets had saved it from tearing, or even dismasting them. But now he was hanging onto the flailing mainsheet with all his weight, and seeing himself slide near the gunwale every time the little boat lurched. "We've got to stop her heeling," he shouted. "This keelless little cockle shell, she will capsize." "It's all right," shouted Ilse. "Any moment now the channel grows wider. The outrush will slow down soon enough." And even as she spoke, its momentum faded, quite suddenly, like a rough child losing interest in the toy it shakes. The boat bobbed and bounced sickeningly for a few minutes, swayed dangerously under the jagged outcroppings of the low roof, and suddenly was straight and upright once again, gliding calm as a swan down the center of the new stream. Ilse and Elof sank down on either side of the tiller, gasping, and then clambered up to help Kermorven rein in the gently flapping sail. "Caress," he said, massaging his arms and looking back into the shadows. "That was a well-turned escape, Ilse. Bad fortune on us that the brute chose to flee south instead of north." "Bad fortune?" asked Elof, to Kermorven's surprise. "What else?" "Only that it was also bad fortune that the other brute also lay in wait for us, when it had the whole town at its feet." Kermorven and Ilse stared at him, and at each other. Finally, the warrior shrugged. "Well, I see no sign of the creature now, so it would seem we have truly escaped it, this time. But I would we could have slain the thing, as we did its fellow, whether it was hunting us or not. I do not like it left free in your people's realm, Ilse. Surely there are many places under the mountains it may hide." "None where we may not hunt it down," said Ilse grimly, and the heavy bones of her face stood out. "Have no fear of that. Do we not have old Andvar to avenge, and many more? Our homes and our forges left ruined and ashen. My folk will harry that thing without ceasing, if we have to hunt it from end to end of the hills and back, until it lies smoking in its own fires before us, or quenched in our deep waters. Its mate slain, it can breed no others to help it. We will have it." She looked up at the roof and the walls around. "As for us, we have other concerns more urgent." "Why?" asked Elof. "Do you not know where we are?" "I believe I know well enough, though I must check on our charts. It is where we may go that worries me, and how we may come to our destination. This is an old channel that has lain unused for longer than I have lived, and I would not have taken it save in desperation. It will take us some way south, but not as the main ones do to our southern lands and their gates. Instead, it turns southwest, without branch or tributary that may be sailed, and leads out under the lower hills, coming at last to their cliffs on the coast, north of the debatable lands." She bit her lip. "Somewhere there it ends in a way out. So much is marked on the chart. But where or how, I have never heard." Kermorven peered at her in blank dismay. "Can we not go back?" "Not through that broken lock," said Elof, "unless we abandon the boat and climb the walls. And then? Would you make your way along that narrow riverbank on foot, with the dragon still sniffing around after us?
No, indeed, said the swordsman ruefully. Not now that it has learned better than to use fire. Very well. Our path must be dark, in every sense. It was a sorer blow that beast thing smote us than it knew. May we still get there in time. How far have we to go?
Ilse was hauling a mass of rolled charts from the locker. Keeping a weather eye on the tunnel ahead, she spread out one on the deck, and the men gathered round to see. "How far?" she said. 7 days sailing, perhaps, if we could sail all the way. It is marked here as a good fast flow, fed by many small springs, and without silting or other hazard, save when the roof grows low on leaving the mountains. Then we must lower the mast at times, and drift, so it may take a little longer.
In this stifling blackness, sighed Kermorven, with nothing to see beyond the light of our lanterns, not even a one of your towns to pass through. 7 days sunless. How shall we mark their passing?
Elof shrugged. I am sorry for you, my friend, but we have seen little enough of the sun for 2 years. A few days more will surely make little difference. If nothing else, we have plenty of time to rest and think. And drink, said Ilse, turning from the chart locker to another. And sing. Here is wine to wash the dragon reek from our throats, and put a merrier light on our journey. They settled down in the stern with food and drink, though always within reach of tiller and winches. Kermorven took the heavy flagon he was offered, twisted out the cork in powerful fingers, sniffed, raised his light eyebrows, tilted it to his lips, and drank deep. Then he lowered it and drew a deep breath.
There is southern sunlight in that wine. Summer sunlight spilt warm across a hillside. And song. And the clash of arms in honorable contest. And the stirring of blood. With that, and in such company, I could almost be happy, even here. But my heart will not cease its yearning for my southlands, and its deep unquiet. Bryhane, he cried aloud, and the echoes rolled under the stone. Bryhane, how close are the raiders upon you? How strong now your walls, how fast your gates. But be they hard as the mountains, as immovable, a power comes that will strike at where you are weakest, I know. How firm holds your soul, my city.
And he sat beside Ilse at the tiller, and softly he began to sing, to an old tune, but with hard and bitter words.
Bryhane, your 7 towers stand gilded by the sun. Beneath your walls the fields lie green, the tree-lined waters run. Yet in your heart what light is there? What grows and comes to flower? Does mine grow cold? Do wicked hands let slip their ancient power? Bryhane, I see you now, once noble, high, and fair. Your greatness gone, your wealth dispersed, as empty as the air. What wasting sickness struck so at the flesh beneath the skin? Took might and honor at a stroke, and withered from within. Bryhane, a sapling tall, but one that dies not grows. The greater tree you left to fall, but now your own sap slows. The winter comes to all that lives, the ice that slays the root. If spring shall ever shine again, will you still bear a shoot? Curb, Rohan, if worth remain, if aught is left to show, the smallest leaf, the slightest bud, from ancient bark to grow. The gain is worth the sacrifice, the battle worth the slain. But will your spirit yet endure the healing stroke of pain?
When his song was ended, Kermorven smiled apologetically. He drank again when the bottle came back to him, and appeared to grow happier, and joined in the songs Ilse and Elof sang. Ilse sang in her low, sour, sweet voice, strange old songs of the dwellers under stone, rendering the words into northern speech for the men. Cold, cold the winds through caverns blowing, dark the waters as under stone they run, but soft is the glow of the lamps at journey's ending, and the gold is warmer than the sun. Fade, fade the leaves upon the branches, as the winter comes till there are none. But deep under earth the stone is ever fruitful, and the gold is brighter than the sun. Fall, fall the suns as summer passes. Short there is life and love grows cold. But here far below a love need know no season, for her eyes are brighter than the gold. Elof in his turn sang a few songs as they drifted through the darkness, though to him his deep voice sounded rougher and less pleasing than theirs. He taught them the old round songs he remembered from his childhood, simple, boisterous songs of herding and fishing, and a few strange snatches he had come upon in his wanderings. So they made merry on their lightless road, not guarding their lanterns or laughter or song. For in that dark vein of the Duergar realm there could be none to hear, save the many small things that scuttled away before the light, and the bats their voices scared out of the roof. They were young, as their different folk counted youth, and they were gliding day by day from danger into danger. But for now, they were at peace. The only excitement came at the times when they saw the rock ahead close down like the gullet of some great beast, and must stand ready by sweeps and fending poles. But as the seventh day, by their rough reckoning, wore on into the eighth, Kermorven, who was on watch, began to grow more and more uneasy, scanning as much of the shores as he could with the lanterns. At last he awoke the others, who in the close air preferred to sleep out on the deck. "This had better be good," growled Ilse from within her blankets. "Hush," said Kermorven. "You who grew up here below, do you not feel it? A change in the air." Ilse sat up. "It grows cooler indeed. And yes, it moves." She looked at them. "We may be drawing near the end of the journey at last."
"What then? Do we simply leap ashore? I have seen no likely place among the teeth of these rocks for a good 3 leagues gone. Or would your folk have set a proper landing stage in a safe corner?"
"That, surely," muttered Ilse, "but I see no sign of one anywhere near, and there is a sound growing I do not like. Almost I feel it, a deep, rumbling sound."
"Rapids?" growled Kermorven.
"No, that sound I know, none better. This is smoother, steadier, with none of the chatter and roar. And we have no room to raise the mast." She stood, still wreathed in blankets, and looked anxiously around. I feel something may have changed, or been changed. We must be ready to escape if we can. Elof looked about him. Where to? I see no bank to land on, no cave or crevice, even in these walls. And we are drifting quite fast.
You are right,
barked Kermorven.
much faster than a minute past. The current is drawing us along, and that sound. Ills, do whirlpools ever form in your rivers?
In no channel we have cleared, nor has it the deep thunder of a fall. Truly strange it sounds. We shall know soon enough, at all events. So, in haste and worry, they gathered together their most precious gear, and a few of the sealed casks the boats carried as floats. That done, they readied the heavy sweeps, knowing they could not hold the boat back against this current. At most, they might steer it past rocks, or fend them off. And then they waited, for that was all they could do, while they were drawn faster and faster on through a passage that grew more menacing by the moment. High rocks seeming to spring from the water like teeth around them. Yet the channel still seemed well chosen, for they were swept safely by and on into the depths of the cavern. Then Ill stood on tiptoe and shouted to Elof, who had taken station in the bows. "Light! I see light! Do you?" Kermorven ran forward to join him.
I see nothing. Black as pitch.
But her eyes are the Duergar's, like a cat's, Elof reminded him. And I, too, think there is something ahead. A glimmer. Then the boat bucked under him, and he was all but flung overboard. Kermorven grabbed at him, and would have gone over instead had he not caught the lantern staff. The roof seemed dropping to meet them. A giant's fury bellowed in their ears, and ills shrieked in fear and delight. A sweep jerked upward, dropped, and splintered against some unseen obstacle. Beyond the bows, a tiny disk of light swelled in an instant as the boat was pitched at it like an arrow at a target, and seemed to burst around them. They sailed out into the very air, and tilted downwards on a leaping, foaming hillside of water. For a mad moment, Elof, sprawling on the deck, thought he was back in the loch. Then the boat evened out once more, and he saw that though there were still fangs of rock overhead, a gray light shone between them and mocked them with fantastic shadows. He heard Ills cry out for help, and saw her bent over the tiller with an arm across her eyes. He staggered aft, and a line swept down the deck with him, like a clear wave washing the grayness from the wood, dimming the lanterns to feeble embers, and setting blinding highlights in the metal. As he reached Ills, he saw astern the impossibly tiny cavern mouth that had spewed them out, the chute of water that had borne them, all so natural, but no doubt cunningly contrived. As surely were the high walls they were gliding between, and the great stone slabs, irregular and dangerous-looking, that formed a roof, or had formed it, for they were there no longer, and he knew, though he dared not look direct lest he be dazzled like Ills, that above them was only the open sky. A wind whipped around him, and he shivered, though once he would not have thought it cold. On the scents and sounds that rode it, a host of memories came flooding back. The smell of salt and wrack, the gull cries echoing into emptiness, the endless beat of the ocean pulse. The walls widened suddenly. The wind grew fresher, and the little boat was bouncing and bucking out into a wider body of water. A small fjord whose steep cliff walls plunged straight down into deep water on either side, without beach or bank or any other break, however small. The wind was at their bow, but lacking mast or sail, they were easily swept down a fast current towards the mouth of the channel, not far ahead. And beyond it, vast and ominous, Elof saw the rolling grayness that was the open sea. Quickly, he helped Ills away from the tiller, but turned at Kermorven's shout. The swordsman, who had spent most time above ground recently, was already wrestling with the sweeps.
"You see it?" he grated. "Good. Rack the tiller, then, and leave it. A lee shore. Wind blowing towards the land, and our own good fortune that it is quite light. We will need all our sinews against the swell."
Ills blinked blearily about. Her huge eyes narrowed. "What are you thinking of?" she cried shakily. "We can't take a boat like this out to sea." "What else remains?" demanded Elof. "There is nowhere we can land. This place both hides that sea gate and defends it. Your ancestors must have chosen it for that." "Aye, or shaped it so," said Ills, and Elof looked up at the high weathered walls in sudden awe. "They would have expected any of our folk coming that way to have a seaworthy ship."
"But we must risk heading out regardless," said Kermorven, "or be dashed back among the rocks, if we stay upright so long. We might get out under sail, on a close reach, but without a keel we would capsize for certain, unless—"
He stared ahead a moment.
"The mast!" he cried then. "Ship the sweeps! We must raise it at once!"
Swiftly they stepped and raised the mast, hauling on stay and halyard till their muscles cracked. Kermorven kept casting anxious glances at the approaching sea as they made fast the last halyard.
"You must keep her headed into the wind a while," he said. "As I remember, they carry plenty of spare gear, these cave boats."
He turned and went clattering down the hatchway into the open hold. "What now?" demanded Ills angrily. "I had sooner we risked it with the sweeps than chance whatever he plans. If I could only see! I am hardier than the old folk. I can endure even the bright sun in time. But I feel so helpless now."
"By Caris's gate!" echoed Kermorven's voice from the hold. "That may do it."
He came bounding up on deck, dragging with him a great length of wood, 4 stout planks some 12 feet long, bound together with iron. Lashed to this with many turns of the Duergar's strong cable was the shank of the broken sweep. Ills blinked. "The cargo plank? What would you with that?" For answer, Kermorven called,
"Help me, Elof!"
and together they manhandled the clumsy planking over the gunwale after the mast. Elof held it while Kermorven bound the shank of the sweep into a rowlock and wound lashing round the planking itself. Then he let it swing downward into the water beneath, which was already churning as the current warred with the wind-driven sea. Quickly he lashed the plank firm against the rail and turned to the mast.
"Mainsail only, till we learn the proper trim. That board may take some getting used to."
Quickly they lowered the mainsail, and Kermorven ran aft to reeve the sheets.
Elof, to the bows and watch. Keep you a firm hold. She may heal badly yet. Ills, how may I use these winding devices?
Elof heard the clank and rattle of the winches as he stumbled forward, the creak of the yards swinging around, and the boom of the tautened sail. Suddenly, the boat seemed to come alive beneath him, leaping forward through the creamy water, heeling slowly away from the wind and then back into it as Kermorvan fought to trim the sail. The water ahead seemed clear. He risked a look astern and saw how Kermorvan was fighting to hold the little craft steady. He was playing the sail as one might a difficult fish, edging closer and closer to the wind till the boat threatened to heel, but never allowing it to go over. His wooden planking thrummed and trembled in its lashings as if great forces strained against it, but seemed to be holding. They were coming out from between the cliffs now, and the wind was suddenly fresher, the sea more lively. The swell was higher, capped by brisk white crests that hissed angrily at the cutting bow beneath them, and slapped hollowly against the boat's lean flanks.
"We are through," called Kermorvan. "Deep water under us. How does the board hold?"
"Well, I'd say," Elof called back. "That was a timely idea, friend."
Kermorvan shrugged. "I should have remembered sooner. It is only a simple lee board, such as my people use on smaller boats that must pass through shallows yet sail well in deeper waters. They mount theirs on pivots, one on either flank, so that they may be raised or lowered at need."
Ilse slapped her hands together. "Of course! I have heard we used such a device on our few sea-going boats, but mounted in the center of the hull, the better to mimic a keel. I have never seen one, though, let alone sailed it."
"If it handles no better than this, I would not pine. Still, it has brought us this far, and that will serve. Do you see anywhere we might come ashore, Elof?"
But Elof, already scanning the cliffs, was shaking his head in dismay. This was a rough and craggy coast, its cliffs raw and steep in their newness, its beaches few and far between, save in deep bays where rivers might lay them down. Kermorvan twisted round to look and cocked his head.
"I know this part of the coast. There are places to land in the marshes a little way south. We're far enough out now. I'll bring her about, and we can turn that way. Hold on, and keep watching."
Elof felt the boat's way slacken as her bow moved to meet the wind head-on. For a moment, she bounced helpless in the waves. Then the yard creaked above, the sail thrummed again, and she swung slowly round and set off more sedately southward, wallowing against the waves. As soon as she was stable, he clambered up on the rail for a better view, and stood clutching the carved stem post, wet now with salty spray. So they were at the north of the marshes now. He smiled, a little grimly, and rubbed his unshaven chin. It had been a long time in his young life. Somewhere over to his left, then, if it still stood, was a tumble-down house by the causeway, its hearth cold, its store of tools left free for any who came by. Had Kara perhaps passed by again, found the door banging loose in the damp wind, and looked in, to find only desolation? But he had seen her, if it was her, pass south on some mysterious errand that might or might not be her own. And in the Southlands, he would start his search. A thought settled upon him and blackened his vision. This you must first do. He remembered the mastersmith as a scared boy had seen him, a vision of power and mystery, and part of him still quailed before it. He searched for something to set against it, and found Ansgar, sturdy, plain of speech and manner, and yet cloaked about in a mystery far greater than the mastersmith's, or any mere man's, the inheritance of a secret ancient folk. He could count Ansgar and Ills his true friends. He was surer of nothing else. And yet, in all his time of living with them, he had never, he knew, been able to look beneath the surface of the Duergar people. He had seen only what in them was akin to human, not what was alien. Perhaps he had not had enough time, for what is 2 years to beings who might live through 4 lives of men, or more? Or perhaps their strangeness was simply too alien to be seen from a human viewpoint, as blank as the cliffs he scanned now. From further out to sea, their narrow openings might be more apparent, the chinks in their armor. But from here, they appeared a wall of grayness as solid as the dark line of shadow on the horizon. But as his eyes settled on that, he forgot about all else, Duergar, beaches, cliffs, and stood where he was, staring out into the dim afternoon light as if it still blinded him. When a hand tugged at his leg, the shock almost overbalanced him. "What is it, Elof?" yelled Ills hoarsely, and he realized his friends must have been shouting to him already. But all he could do at first was point. "What?" she shouted. "There's nothing I can make out but a black streak on the sky, miles off. Does it mean a storm?" "It does," said Elof curtly and sprang down. "Kermorven, do you see that?" "I do, though my eyes still dazzle. It seems almost to hang above the horizon, like the black fume of earth fires. But the wind drives it far south of us. It cannot harm." "Can it not, then?" cried Elof. "Are you also grown blind under the earth, to see it as a cloud? Look again." Kermorven rose and stared, and then looked quickly to Elof. "It cannot be. Not stretching so far as that." "It is, I tell you. Do you think I do not know that sight? Black sails, black hulls, mastheads, pinions fluttering halfway from here to sunset, and more ahead. You know their fleets. Have you ever seen a greater?" "Not since first I took sword in hand against them," groaned Kermorven. "The assault is launched at last, the final blow, and we come too late." For an instant, it seemed he would let fall the tiller and all else. But even as Ills made to grab the tiller from him, his back stiffened. Spots of scarlet blazed in his cheeks as he measured the black line on the horizon, weighing up its distance and its numbers. "Not too late. Not yet. They cannot overwhelm Kerbrahine, the city, in a day. In a week even, with or without the mastersmith's weaponry. And beyond that lies all of the Southland." "But we're north of the marshes. It would take us weeks on end to work our way south from there." Kermorven nodded.
I think we must keep to the water as long as we can.
Ilse looked at him, shielding her eyes. You know the sea. I do not. But how long will these light timbers hold it out? Not long, I think. Already they complain at the rough play these high waves give them.
Yes, and this is light weather enough. But I can see no other way. A few hours, a few days, a week even. We must grasp at whatever time we can save, great or small.
Elof flexed his fingers, thinking of the gauntlet, stowed carefully in his pack. We risk losing everything, our lives included. But what good will any of it do if we arrive too late? He thought of Kara, caged in by the shadow of fear, and clenched his fist. You be the judge. Ilse nodded wryly. Anyway, it's rare weather for a dip. Kermorven settled down by the tiller once more, and stretched out his long legs with a contented sigh.
Then we sail on,
he said calmly, and the cold glitter of the waves shone in his eyes.